All right. Welcome everyone to the Water Advocates Third Thursday workshop and speaker series. Thank you for joining us this evening. The Water Advocates mission is to advocate for a balanced, equitable, and resilient water future for all of New Mexico through public education and engagement and civic participation, with urgent insistence on initiating and accelerating the transformative change necessary for New Mexico's successful adaptation to increasing water scarcity. The Water Advocates' main activism areas are located on the traditional homelands of the Southern Tiwa, pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations, and also acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I am going to introduce our fabulous Bernalillo County Commission Chair, Eric Olivas. And I'm going to spotlight his pin and spotlight his video for you all. And Eric, would you give a few introductory words about yourself?
Sure. As was said, I'm Eric Olivas. I'm the Bernalillo County Commissioner for District 5. And District 5 includes all of the East Mountains, as well as much of the Uptown area, Northeast Heights, Middle Northeast Heights, Foothills, Four Hills. There's 5 county commissioners, so these are very, very big districts, substantially larger than a state senate district or a state house district, just to give you some perspective. I was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the son of 2 APS teachers that always taught me to do the right thing, even if it wasn't easy. Try to do that. And we all know that's part of being human is struggling with that. But just so grateful for my upbringing here in Albuquerque. And I've always had an inherent curiosity about water and water issues. Being a child of the Southwest and understanding that. So I am grateful to have been raised here by an amazing family and graduated from Sandia High School and then went on to the University of New Mexico. And at UNM, I was able to achieve a master's degree in biology, which was a degree related to the impacts of climate change on pinon pine, which is pretty relevant to what we see going on today and a little bit of what we're going to talk about this evening. So in my professional life, I'm a landscaper and a plumber. So I like to think I'm also, not only am I on the policy side of water, but oftentimes I'm on the conservation side of water, literally, fixing leaks and trying to make sure that our landscapes are beautiful, but also not overwatered. And then in 2022, I was elected to the county commission for District 5. I challenged an incumbent of my own party and won that primary election and went on to win in the general election. So I've served in there since 2023 when I was seated and was elected by my colleagues as the chair of the county commission in this last year. So I've been in that role since January. I'm incredibly grateful to my colleagues to trust me with that awesome responsibility. Take that very seriously. And also, I've served now 3 terms on the Water Utility Authority Board. So every year that I've been on the commission, I've served on the utility and continued to satisfy my curiosity about water and water in our region. So always grateful to be with the Water Advocates, grateful to be here tonight, and grateful that I just saw my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Commissioner Frank Baca, come in. And just so you all know, the commission's actually on recess. We don't formally recess, but July is our month off. And so many of us try to use that time to, get away, family, all those things. And so I just want to appreciate Commissioner Baca. I just got back from a trip and he's on a trip. So this is important work and we both wanted to be here. So
Thank you so much for that introduction, Eric. Frank, would you please take a moment to introduce yourself? Are you able to hear us?
Sure. Thank you. apologize. I'm on my cell phone. I'm sitting in a airport in New York, getting ready to fly overseas. My name is Frank Baca, lifelong resident of Albuquerque, lifelong resident for the most part of Albuquerque's South Valley. I am a lawyer by trade. I've been retired for close to 5 years now, so I have my law license, and but essentially I'm retired for all intents and purposes. And heard a part of Eric's introduction, and I'll just say that I recently, the newest member of the, I guess, of the Bernalillo County Commission, just was elected, started in January of this year. So I've been on for about 6 months. And I'll also say, just to be totally honest, is I'm not knowledgeable about water and water issues, but like many other issues out there, I'm trying really hard to learn and to get up to speed on. And water is something that's up there on my list of things to learn and about and to be engaged in. And it is a very important issue, obviously, to the state and our community, but certainly to people that that I represent in the South Valley. So I've also been appointed to the Water Utility Authority, which gives me another opportunity to learn. And I'm just going to just say just very briefly that my experience in terms of my personal observations and involvement with water, begin when, as a child living in the South Valley and seeing the landscape in my neighborhood that had was extremely different than it is now in many respects. And I just remember growing up on an acre of land with people around me having gardens and orchards and things of that nature, and a lot of greenery. And I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in terms of my observations and experiences. And the only thing I know is that and I've always appreciated the story about Senator Dennis Chavez and the vision that he had some 70 years ago to secure water rights. Because as a child growing up in Albuquerque, the conventional wisdom was that we had enough water for, I think it was something like a million people for 1,000 years or something to that effect. And that's what I kind of grew up thinking. So I'm very glad to be around people who are knowledgeable about water and who are willing to help me to learn and help to engage me in the process. So happy to be here, and hopefully there's not background noise because, like I said, I am sitting in an airport, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me and I'll be able to hear you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. And I may mute you if we've got a lot of background when Eric's speaking. So hopefully you can easily unmute yourself otherwise. But thank you both for joining us this evening. I'm looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Eric now.
Thanks, Brittany. And what I really wanted to start with this evening as we gather here today is, to me, especially in the last few days, as I said, I just got back from a wonderful backpacking trip in the Pecos Wilderness, the one of the most beautiful parts of New Mexico, and had a little bit of opportunity just to reflect on nature, on environment, on the issues around water, right? And I came back, and one of the things that I participated in today, actually, and I'll relate all this back, I promise, was a news conference. And the news conference today was about some flooding that we saw in the Tijeras Canyon. And so just this past weekend, last Saturday, we saw a 500-year storm event that occurred in the East Mountains area. A lot of areas getting 3 inches of rain in 30 minutes or less, rain or hail. And so we saw just this torrential current flowing down our Tijeras Creek, which is normally, kind of an ephemeral stream. Some years it does better. Used to do a lot better, right? If you talk to some of the old timers at the Caronway Land Grant, right, they'll share with you that there used to be people that irrigated off of that creek, that much water, that much consistency. And of course, all of that has changed now. And now we are seeing these extremes, right? Where we got almost no snow all winter. And then we see this deluge that just inundates our infrastructure and, threatens lives and property. And the other story that I wanted to share is similar and interrelated. When I was out backpacking, right? One of the individuals that we met along the trail, as you often do, remarked on his many years hiking in the wilderness. And we had noticed this as well, but we noted that there was a tremendous spruce tree die-off in the wilderness, and most of it from the tree line down to some elevation, but less die-off at lower elevations. And this guy was passionate about it. He was angry about it, and he said in different words. I'll let you insert the words that you imagine, but he said, "We screwed all of this up." We being humans, right? Climate change, the changing future. And so both of those stories that I wanted to share, really for me, I wanted to kind of frame our talk tonight around climate impacts, right? And the reason that we have to become a more resilient Middle Rio Grande around water issues specifically is in large part, not in total, but in large part due to climate change, right? Which we have all caused, right? Going back many generations, and we can spend a lot of time pointing fingers and casting blame, and there's plenty of that to go around. But we are now at a critical point where the impacts of climate change and human development are coinciding with natural cycles and the state of water in New Mexico, which is an arid state in a good year, right? And so I think it's just incredibly important to frame this conversation and so many conversations about water around climate change and the impacts that is having on our water resources. And so in the Middle Rio Grande, in our role, Commissioner Baca and I, but really this applies to all of us, because I think it's important to note that the power of the government, right, the power of elected officials is ultimately derived from all of us, right? The highest authority in our democracy is we the people. And I know right now, many of us may not feel that our will is being expressed at every level of government, but that is the way that we drive power. And so the point there being that this is an issue that particularly the water advocates are critical to driving that discussion and bringing forward water issues and conservation issues around water to the forefront of the conversation, and enabling political leaders like Commissioner Baca and myself to make what are ultimately likely to be very tough decisions, right? As we build a more resilient Middle Rio Grande, it is going to require hard decisions. It is going to require a collective sacrifice. But I believe a collective sacrifice is better than a collective suffering. And I think that is the alternative if we do nothing at all, right? We are presented with a case where we can join together and decide as a community where we can tolerate some sacrifices, or ultimately, if we ignore the problem, I believe we will be faced with a situation where we are told where to sacrifice. We will have powers above us come into our communities and tell us that we have to do certain things. And I think right now, as we often hear from the president of the Water Advocates, Norm Gom, the Rio Grande Compact, I think, looms large over everything we do, or it should, if it isn't already. And I believe that entering that compact, that critical compact level, will be particularly challenging for the Middle Rio Grande and all of us, because we can see, particularly in the political climate right now, we do not have a favorable Supreme Court. We do not have a favorable position in Congress from the perspective of just the size of our political delegation in Washington relative to Texas, or some of those other aligned interests. So I think it behooves us that we have to get ahead of this problem before it gets ahead of us. And so that's where the nexus of policymaking and political activism and all of the things come together. And so what I wanted to frame here tonight in thinking about how do we make the Middle Rio Grande more resilient? I believe that there's a way to some extent simplify the problem. And so I'm going to lay out a few of these interests, users, however you want to frame it, and then Commissioner Baca is going to jump in and really dive into one of them, and we'll circle back around. But in no particular order, I think it's critical as we started the meeting here to recognize that we have Indigenous peoples, right, that live in our community, and we have tribal nations that have vested interests in our community and our land and water that surrounds our communities. And so, of course, the Middle Rio Grande Pueblos are critical. And many of those water rights, in fact, I think maybe all of them, have not been adjudicated, right? So we have a significant level of uncertainty in what happens with our tribal nations and their water rights and their, supremacy in those water rights. And so that's a critical issue that we are going to face together as a region. Secondly, we have, really many sort of regulatory agencies, right, that don't necessarily have a strong interest in and of itself, right? They're not so much users, but interested regulators, right? We have the state engineer who has really put a magnifying glass on the Middle Rio Grande. And, State Engineer Anderson comes from the Water Utility Authority. She knows the Middle Rio Grande very well. And I commend her for having the political courage to really tackle the elephant in the room, which is the Middle Rio Grande. It's a politically influential region, right? Particularly if you just think about the party in charge of the state of New Mexico. The large part of the Democratic Party and the base of the party is rooted in the Middle Rio Grande. And so you have some very strong interests in the region politically, not to mention economically and all the other ways. So for her to step in and say that one of her top priorities is to adjudicate and regulate and tackle the problems in the Middle Rio Grande is, I think, actually a breath of fresh air. It's a welcome sign that regulators are paying attention. But it's not just the state engineer, right? We know that we have the Bureau of Reclamation. We have the Army Corps of Engineers under the Bureau. We have an array of federal agencies that are involved in the Middle Rio Grande and regulating what happens with our water. And so important to consider all of those factors. And then we get into what I think are really the not to say that those groups are not critical, but just from a perspective of use, who's using the water and where is the water going? I think then there's three major groups that we really have to consider. And I'm going to start with the one that I think is least considered. And that is our environment, right? We often leave that one out. And that was abundantly clear to me this week as I was backpacking, that in all reality, the environment usually gets its water first, regardless of what we want or what we think, right? Climate change devastating our mountain regions, drying out the soils. It means that even in a good snow year, more of that snow stays in the mountains, right? Because those soils are parched, the water stays there. Less of it comes down to the watersheds. And we have riparian areas, right? The bosque. And we can often look at that, of course, as just this amazing biological, ecological resource, but also an economic one, right? We see incredible recreation opportunities, rafting, hiking, biking, all of these incredible things up and down our Middle Rio Grande Bosque. And that region has to be protected. But quite frankly, it has often been mismanaged, right? We know that we have invasive species. We have over-engineered the river in many cases. And then you look at really complicated situations like, pumping and what that means for the river and the flows in the river and the infiltration in the river. So I think it's incredibly important that we center the environment in all of this, and the need for the environment to have water, and it's going to get its water one way or another, regardless of what humans do. And so, but it's often the least represented, I think, right? There's not really an advocacy group for that, right? There are many, I should say. There are many advocacy groups, NM Wild, the Sierra Club, right? But from the perspective of municipal interests or agricultural interests, I think it's the least represented, but perhaps one of the most important. After that, we have the group that Commissioner Baca and I both serve on, the Water Utility Authority, municipal users. It's not just the city of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, but you have the village of Los Lunas and the town of Belen and Pueblo communities, right? You have communities all up and down the Rio Grande that are that need water, right? We need water as people to survive, to wash clothes, to do our dishes, to live. And I think that group has largely shouldered most of the conservation efforts to date, right? We have really driven significant gains in conservation, specifically at the ABCWA, where we have drastically reduced per capita use. And like most Western cities, we have grown and at the same time managed to reduce our water use, right? And so pretty incredible consumption stats that we've been able to achieve. But given that makeup of use, the amount of use, consumptive use in particular, of municipal users is relatively small. But of course, I think we all generally see that it's politically, economically, socially, 100% unacceptable to short those users, would be the term I use. I don't mean to ask for conservation, but what I mean to point out is that I don't think anyone would find it acceptable, right, to turn on their tap and not have water come. That's always going to be, frankly, the number one concern of people, of voters, of residents, is, do I have water? And unfortunately, when they do, many people don't think about it after that, right? The water works, that's it, right? End of story, nothing to worry about. And that's where we really have to change some hearts and minds and educate people. And then the last area where I'm going to turn it over to my colleague who really knows this area far better than I. You heard me describe my district. Not a lot of farming going on in District 5. If there is, it's a lot of dryland farming. But agricultural users are a key piece of our water equation in the region. And, I think that there's an incredible balance to be reached there where we want agriculture in our community. As I said, I don't have a lot of it in my district, but, I can tell you, I want to make sure that I can go to a farmer's market and buy a watermelon that was grown on the Rio Grande, with the Rio Grande's waters. I want to make sure that I can buy tomatoes and lettuce and agricultural products that are from New Mexico, that are grown here in the region. We all want to see that green belt along the valley, which is not just the bosque, right? But it's also the farms and the fields and the trees that are irrigated from the waters of the Rio Grande. And so that's an incredibly important perspective. And I want to turn it over to Commissioner Baca to share about his experience in the Middle Valley and the agriculture.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate it. Hope you all can hear me. So I had an interesting conversation as I was thinking just this last week, thinking about this presentation. The South Valley does have a growers market. There's several of them, I guess, and the one I go to typically is on Friday at like 5 to 8 at Dolores Huerta Park, which is on Bridge Street in Isleta. And I was there, as I usually am on Friday afternoons, and I was talking to a friend of mine who I have known to grow peaches and other things. And I saw him this time, and he had cherries. And I said, I didn't know you grow cherries. He said, no, I don't grow them. I I bought these, I ordered these. And I said, what about your trees? And he started telling me some experiences he had with water and the ditches. And he talked about access to water. He talked about the ditch rider. He talked about how he had 40 trees, and because of lack of access to water, 37 of them had died. And what he said to me, which was kind of scary, kind of frightening, but was real, he was talking about the fact that there's such an emotional attachment of people that use water to grow and farm, and is that he mentioned that back in the day, the ditch riders, he called them, used to carry around a sidearm. And he talked about, he in fact even admitted to me that he had been known to himself to cut the chains of the locks to be able to irrigate his property. Of course, he doesn't have the trees anymore to do that. But what that just really hit home for me is the emotional attachment that people have to their land and their access to water. And as I said earlier, I'm not a water expert. I never dealt with it in terms of politics or in terms of law. I am a lawyer, but I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to appreciate it. The concern that so many groups and advocates have. So what I do know a little bit about is A, as a lawyer, how to convince people, and then B, as a community activist, which I essentially consider myself to be, is how to have that discussion with the community. And as Eric knows, my mantra is community engagement. I bring up that topic at almost every commission meeting: community engagement, community engagement. We have to talk to people. And what I've learned over the many, many years I've been involved in community activities and with my experience as a lawyer is that we have to be patient, and we have to speak in terms of what people in a way that they will understand, but we also have to listen. And in order to get someone's attention, in order to eventually bring them around to any point of view, in my opinion, it starts with listening and being totally willing to hear their side, their story, their concerns, their history. And in doing that, then it leads to a process where a conversation can take place. And then after doing that conversation, you get to a point where somebody can be actually convinced about something, perhaps. But I think that if we ever get to the point where there's mandates in place, you can't do this, you can't do that, I think it's going to be, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be pushback. But I think people, when approached in that way, so that they have been listened to, they've been heard, and we are not expecting overnight, conversion, if you will, to understanding some of the things have to change. I think there's definitely you can get that, you can reach that point where there is an agreement over time. So I can say for myself, my understanding, my limited understanding of water and the issues that we have has grown dramatically over the last year, as I've just been talking to people and listening to people and reading a little bit about it. And so I think the same approach applies to farmers, whether it's in the South Valley or all over the Middle Rio Grande area, whether it applies to people that have, that have gardens or businesses or properties that use lots of water. I think it really involves a process of truly engaging them in the conversation, listening to them, providing them with facts and information, and just not expecting that they're going to overnight say, "Oh yes, I get this, I understand that it's a process." I apologize for the background noise. I hear a lot of noise come out over the loudspeakers here, so I'm hoping you can hear me. But anyway, I do think that my role as a commissioner and as a sort of a community activist is simply to be out in the community, listen to people, listen to their concerns, and then get information provide that, have that discussion. And I do think that, most of us, 95% of us, 98% of us are reasonable, rational beings. And, confronted with an approach that is respectful and is fact-based, people will come on board and understand that things have to change. So I'm learning, and I think, I'm happy that I've been had this opportunity to meet with people who are obviously much more knowledgeable than I am. And I think most people will also feel that same way if given some time, presented with facts, and being treated in a very respectful way. I can't say that everybody's gonna say, oh yes, I totally get it, and I'm gonna shut off the tap or whatever. But it's a process. It's a process. Education is a process. So I think that's my approach to everything that I deal with on the commission, whether it's, we're dealing with more mundane matters or the big picture issues of water, land use, and air. It's the same approach. It's just listen to people, get out in the community, listen to them, engage them in conversation, and provide facts and information, and be a little bit patient and tolerant. And I think we can get to the point where people can understand and to appreciate. You're never going to convince everybody, right, or 100%. But I think that process leads to some good discussions, and ultimately, people will over time do the right thing, and it may take some time. And as long as we're patient, we can get there. So I'm going to stop talking here because I'm hearing a lot of noise over the PA system here in the airport. So hopefully you guys could have heard some of what I said.
We heard everything you said very clearly. The background noise was not very audible, and just barely heard a little bit, and your voice was loud and clear over the top of it. So thank you for sharing your perspective tonight.
Thank you.
So, one thing that I kind of wanted to wrap up and really want to leave this to me, have a discussion, right? Because I think as Commissioner Baca was just stating, part of the issue, right, is the difference between a hammer and a carrot, essentially, right? And when we bring the hammer down, when the long arm of government comes in and forces things on people, that often doesn't go over very well, right? And so I think part of the reason why having a genuine conversation and listening and asking for ideas, and idea that what I'm suggesting is ideas from this group here, is recognizing that as policymakers, we don't necessarily know every detail, every answer to how we solve a problem, but we know a lot of the players, right? We sit on the Water Authority board, and we have members of the MRGCD that are our constituents. I'm speaking for Commissioner Baca, but we have environmental advocates and cyclists and hikers and people that live in our districts and care about these issues. And so as policymakers, I think we're that nexus, right? We're in that position where we can both make some of those decisions, but also raise awareness, educate, and listen, right? You can do all of those things at the same time and working through this space. And so I think we're in a unique position, but I think oftentimes perhaps there may be too much faith placed in the ability of policymakers to drive change, when in fact, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, I truly believe the power of policymakers comes from the people. And so it requires that we have those conversations, that we listen, that we learn, and that we, a little bit of a push-pull sometimes, right? Sometimes it means bringing people along. Sometimes people are pushing you or pulling you. But I think that that's what's really powerful about spaces like this, is that we can really engage in that dialogue and hear from our constituents, hear from people that understand the issues. But what I wanted to say before we sort of get to that was that I think, as we were saying, right, there's all these diverse users, these diverse groups, interests, users, whatever you want to call them. And that's really what is the root of the challenge of water governance in the Middle Rio Grande, right? But it's also the key to building that resiliency, right, is building coalitions and bringing those different, very diverse user groups, often competing, right? In many cases, those groups are competing, right? You have developers buying up farmland and building houses there, right? And so you have, agricultural water rights and agricultural uses competing with residential uses and commercial uses. And you have, environmental uses competing with that, invasive species and needs of our watersheds. So that's really the inherent challenge here, right? In the Middle Rio Grande. And the thing that separates us from the upper Rio Grande or the Pecos or the lower Rio Grande, right, is really just the size. I think all of those other areas have the same challenges. They have the same user groups fundamentally, but they're just smaller, right? They have less of them. They have, it's just a function of the size of the Middle Rio Grande, both geographically and population wise, right? We have our biggest city, some of our most productive farmland. And so it's very hard to get all of those user groups in the same room and get everyone to have that conversation, right? And agree on what the problem is, and much less, agree to what the solution is or how you get to the solution. But I do think, I really do have an incredible amount of hope that we're getting a lot closer, right? I really do believe that through things like the governor's 50-year water plan and the water data initiatives, which you all in this room here, this virtual room, have been critical to, right? You all are the ones that have driven this conversation by and large, along with some policymakers that I think you all have also encouraged and educated. So through those initiatives, I think that is how we can ultimately bring people together, right? Through a very carefully thought out water planning effort that brings those groups together, that recognizes that we are far better off together than at each other's throats, because if we can't solve this problem ourselves, I have a very strong feeling at some point a solution will be placed upon us, and that is far less likely to be an agreeable solution than one that we come up with ourselves, right? One that farmers and municipal users and industrial users and environmental organizations all come together and agree. They may not like it, right? I think you have to kind of start this out by saying, look, everybody might have to suffer, right? Everybody's going to have a little bit of pain here, but it's a question of, does everybody have a little bit of pain, or does certain user groups completely get cut off, or do we have these kinds of draconian things that we've seen in Arizona, for example? I don't think we want to be that kind of community. We've never been that kind of community, just in our history as New Mexicans, right? That this place goes back a long way, and even when you had the Pueblos and the Spanish and all of the conflict that were going on there, there was still really a cooperation often around water issues and those kinds of things. Even if there was exploitation and all those types of things, I think there was still a recognition of that shared resource. And so I think we have to lean on that and lean into that this is a resource we share. This is a planet we share, a community we share. And so I really want to hear from the group on some of the perspectives, the ideas that you all bring, and how we as policymakers can effectuate the change that we need to see, which is really driving lower use and more conservation across the board. I know that all of you likely agree with me here that fanciful solutions are probably not going to save us here, right? I was at you all are probably familiar with Campbell Ranch and the issues around that development out in the East Mountains. And one of the supposed solutions proposed by some of the folks on the development side was, are you going to build a pipeline from the Mississippi, right? These just moonshot solutions that I think we all know that the easiest solution here is to come together and have some shared but lesser sacrifice that benefits the whole. So really hoping to hear from you all and have some conversation.
Thanks so much, Eric. We have a little bit of a smaller group here tonight, so I am going to let it be free form for now. So if you want to have some comments, please go ahead and unmute yourself. Please take turns and don't interrupt each other. And then we'll have a wonderful discussion going forward. If we do start to get a little bit of interruptive competing people wanting to comment, then I will switch to raise your hand and I'll call on people. But I think that we can all be respectful of each other and just be free form this evening. So there have been several comments in the chat. I hope that the people who commented would go ahead and unmute themselves and bring those comments into the verbal arena here. The floor is open for you all.
Thank you both for doing this and sharing your perspective. And I know you wanted to hear from us about our suggestions, and I'm on the board of the Water Advocates, but you know, we've been talking a lot about public education and how to communicate the fact that we are in a water crisis and that we are headed towards and already in need of water shortage sharing agreement. So given your roles as listeners and people who are really out, you know, listening and getting feedback from constituents, we'd love to hear your thoughts about what methods might be good for communicating with the public. I mean, speaker, you know, something at a community center, you know, just social media. I don't know, just any ideas you have to share with us about what you think may be effective to more broadly spread the word about the water crisis.
Commissioner Baca, you have thoughts?
Looks like he may have gotten to a harder place to talk.
I'm happy to jump in. That's just kind of his area of expertise, so I wanted to let him go first there. You know, I think to me, public engagement is really challenging, right? It's kind of I wouldn't say it's hard to measure, but it's really hard to calibrate, right? And oftentimes there's a lot of trade-offs and decision making just involved in those strategies, like you discussed, right? With social media, you get 5 seconds of someone's attention on average, or I think it's even less than that, right? For the average kind of scroll viewer type of thing. Whereas with something like a community meeting, you know, kind of a deeper dive session, you may get lower sort of raw numbers, right? Your eyeballs that are running across that information that you're trying to share, or the dialogue you're trying to have. But I think it presents an opportunity to have a much deeper dialogue, right? To really dive in and grow engagement and educate each other, right? Because often you're learning something just as you're teaching something in a good dialogue. So I think there's merit to both, or you know, to all of those strategies. And so I think it really depends on who the outreach is for. And one of the things that I would kind of highlight that we're trying at the county is sort of a new strategy with our economic development initiatives, and trying to really do a deep dive in talking to people. We're doing that through listening sessions, right? Actual, you know, in-person type sessions. I think there's a virtual component, but I think part of our strategy there was to meet people where they are, right? Both in their community, in different parts of the community, but offering things like food, childcare, right? Really making it easy for people to be there, easy for people to give up an evening or an hour, or you know, whatever you're asking of them. And then also targeting that outreach for those events to sort of, you know, who are you hoping to hear from, or maybe you want a diverse perspective, but you want to make sure that there's certain representatives. So I think in this water discussion, right, you know, I laid out who I think are the most important or you know, key groups. I think that kind of key outreach is really important to make those successful. But I see we got Commissioner Baca back, maybe.
Hey, can you hear me? I can hear you.
We can hear you.
I lost the video somehow, but I'm afraid to mess with it too much and to accidentally boot myself out of it. And I heard the question and the response by Commissioner Chair Olivas, and I agree with that. I agree with that. I'm a big fan of parenting meetings. I think, I go to a lot of neighborhood association meetings. We organize a fair number of community meetings. I've literally gone to hundreds, maybe 1,000 in my lifetime, and I just think that's a great way to talk to people, to hear from people, to get the word out. And again, the question in my mind is always not so much the meeting, but the expectations, in the sense that if you have people show up who are knowledgeable but are willing to listen to the perspective of people that are in attendance, in my opinion, that just goes so far in having meaningful conversation and actually getting people to not become defensive and to start looking at things a different way. So it's something I hope the county is going to go through just systematically for all sorts of different issues and that are important to our community. But I think that approach works with I think would work with this issue, this important issue, and just set up meetings. Sometimes you'll get a few people show up, sometimes you get a lot of people show up, but neighborhood associations are a great opportunity if there's a speaker that would want to go out and to meet. We can arrange, at least in my district, District 2, through my office, through my assistant, Mike Padilla. District 2 at burnco.gov is my email. I shared it privately with Elaine, I think, but we would be happy to be part of it, to arrange somebody to show up. And again, the key is be there with information, but be willing to simply hear people's perspective on the issue, and then say, well, here's some of the factual information. We're not here to argue. We're not here to even convince you. We're just here to provide information. But most importantly, we're here to listen to you. That, in my opinion, my experience, it makes a lot of headway. So, I love community meetings, and I'm a big supporter of it. I think that's a great way. I think there's other ways as well. Of course, social media, I think Eric mentioned, and many other ways that people get information. But I still like the old-fashioned way of just talking to people in person and being willing to share information, but more importantly, be able and willing to listen to their concerns. And again, we have to be patient about this or any other issue. It's not going to change overnight. It's a process.
And I wanted to add one other thing here, Anne, as Commissioner was speaking. I think that the social media is a tool, and I think that it can help drive engagement in those deeper sessions. But, just in my sort of limited experience, I think that the sort of education and outreach from that is kind of limited to driving people into those sessions, right? To advertising in-person engagements or advertising kind of deeper dialogues to sort of very surface level educate people and get them interested in the topic, and then you can drive them into that conversation in a deeper way.
Ralph, go ahead.
Well, hello, Eric. Hello, Frank. Thank you very much for your talk and your passion on these subjects. I actually had posted one question in the chat that Frank already answered, and that he is engaging with the South Valley Acequia Association, if that's their name. I'm just loosely saying it, and that you want to engage with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. So my two-part question. Actually, the first part goes to Frank, your answer or your talk, confirming that we need to meet with our neighborhood associations and others in public forums. That I wanted to let you know that the New Mexico Water Advocates has been developing presentations in what we want to launch as a speakers bureau. And we have presentations that are nearing completion on the Rio Grande Compact and its, on our concerns. And we have another presentation on water issues, a basic presentation on water issues confronting New Mexico and in particular the Middle Rio Grande Valley. And then we have another one on groundwater. And then another one that's being worked on would be on water planning and water management. And if if we could speak to you later, we might be able to coordinate something. Of course, we don't have a lot of bodies to be able to present these things, but we would like to try to roll these out maybe in community forums that you would like to have. So that's just one thing I wanted to let you know about. And then the other thing is a question to Eric, because Eric, you have been on the ABCWA, the Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority, for a while now, and running the show, right? So anyhow, we know that the ABCWA has a 2120 water management plan, saying that they're going to be able to provide water for this greater Albuquerque area for the next 100 years. And maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but we're talking about, trying to plan for resiliency of the Middle Rio Grande Valley. Is there something that you might be able to share from that Water 2120 plan that they feel is really the foundation of how they intend to provide water for this large metropolitan area over the next 100 years? Just a couple things, not to put you on the spot.
Well, I'll ask, Frank, if he wants to respond at all to the first part of that question, or I guess it was more of a comment, but I don't know if he wants to say anything.
Okay. I would love that. I would love that to engage community associations with speakers, whether it be our office doing that, my assistant, or we have a community engagement person that can do that. But I think I'm really, really, really trying to encourage the neighborhood associations of a certain format that some of them use, as really successful ones use a certain format where they invite people to provide information. And because those informations are action-packed, information-packed, they seem to do a lot better as far as getting turnout. But yeah, I mean, however we can do that, reach out. People always appreciate the information about different subjects, and we'd be happy in any way we can to help facilitate that process.
All right, thank you, Frank.
All right, so I'll try to take the other half of that question. And I think, I have some thoughts about Water 2120, and some are good and some are bad, right? I think that the utility thus far to date, has made incredible progress in securing our water future, right? We went from a utility that was 100% groundwater based to a utility that now has a much more diverse portfolio, right? We're doing groundwater pumping, we're doing surface water diversions through the San Juan Chama project. Here I was talking about how we can't count on engineers to save us, but this is actually an example to some degree of that, right? A really big engineering project that has allowed us to diversify our supply. And now we're moving more and more towards things like reuse. And so, I think all three of those are fraught, right? Water is a very complicated issue. And so, I started talking about climate change. That is really challenging for surface water in particular, right? Because we're seeing less snowpack, we're seeing, drier soils in the mountains, and we're seeing, lower flows in the rivers, which means we have to turn off our diversion plant, right? All of these things that impact that surface water flow. And so I have real doubts about some of the projections that the utility shows for what it projects it can use in surface water, particularly in the out years, right? When we know it's likely to just get hotter and drier. So in current years, we often don't meet the goal for surface water diversions that the utility sets and projects because of the climate and just the surface water not being available. I think there's some regulatory fixes there, or maybe we should say band-aids, right? There's this rule that the San Juan Chama water has to ride on native water. These are really complicated, literally like act of Congress type of things. But I don't think that means we don't do it, right? The utility spent decades working to store native water in Abiquiu, and we finally got it. So those are worth pursuing, and I think that needs to be part of that plan. I also have real challenges with reuse, because one of the things, particularly as we think about compact compliance, right now, right, the river's dry. The biggest tributary to the Rio Grande right now, very likely, is the ABCWA sewage treatment plant, right? We're putting a lot of the water back in the system. And as we divert more and more of that water to reuse, and most of that reuse right now is outdoor landscape water, right? So that doesn't come back to the plant, right? I think you could make an argument that toilet to tap, I know that's not the PC term for that, but toilet to tap actually does return the water back to the treatment plant. But most of the use we're doing right now through reuse is going to be watering grass and watering landscapes, and we'll never see that water come back into the system again. Maybe it's some small percentage of recharge that eventually makes it to the aquifer. So I think relying on those two sources in particular are troubling. I think we've really got to take a hard look at that. But I think we also have to recognize the reality that I stated earlier, that is, well, there's a couple of them, that the utility has made, I believe, more progress than any agency, any entity in the state of New Mexico on water conservation, right? They've invested heavily. It's been a multi-decade effort, and they've been wildly successful. And at some point, right, this is a sponge. We're not going to wring that much more savings out of municipal users. There's just not much left to cut, right? People wash clothes, people do dishes, people flush toilets. There's at some point we run out of cuts. And one of the things I see that's really frustrating as a landscaper in my professional life is I believe a lot of our outdoor landscaping conservation efforts have led to the death of our urban canopy. And, after the fact, the utility is trying to reverse that with tree baits and things. But we've seen so many conversions of turf where you had a healthy, gorgeous tree and people cut out the lawn, the tree's fine for a couple years, and then it starts its slow and steady decline. And particularly that has occurred in marginalized areas. Commissioner Baca was talking about some of what he's seen in South Valley, how that environment's changed. We see it in the International District, in the Northeast Heights. Our urban canopy's dying. And I think that speaks to the fact that there is only so much conservation that we can wring out of the utility. And I think we're getting close to a point where it's going to be hard to get a lot more. And I think that shows in the plateauing of our GPCD, or maybe it's GCPD. Sorry, I'm forgetting my acronym now, but our gallons per capita per day has really plateaued. And we're seeing that the gains are slowing down, and naturally they will. So I think that is going to require us to get creative. And one of the things I would like to see the utility do more of, and I think is a potential solution, is rather than look inward, right? The utility is really focused inward. And that's smart, right? We all say focus on. Sorry. So I think that focus inward, leads to solutions like more conservation rebates, the toilet to tap, those kinds of things. But I think the gains from that are limited. And so I'd like to see the utility look outside of itself. And so how could the utility partner with environmental organizations, right? And we do to some extent to do watershed restoration work or bosque invasive species management work. But I think there's much more gains to be made in spaces like that than there are in the utility itself, in the users. I don't think there's a lot left. Or another example of the huge big fish in the room, right, is agricultural diversions. And like I said, I don't want to see that go away. But is there a way that the utility can help the MRGCD incent new irrigation techniques, better, conservation, drip irrigation, right? Things that I realize it's going to require some really thoughtful conversations with farmers, with kind of a cultural shift. But I think that is where the utility needs to go, and I would like to see Water 2120 head more in that direction, to look at how can the utility use its ratepayer base to help get conservation in those other areas, so that we don't have to further decimate our tree canopy.
I mean, I'm just going to follow up with that very quickly, Eric, because I noticed that there is a particular line item in my water bill that actually, and I wish I had it in front of me right now, that actually increased the amount of the base monthly fee for kind of what you would say the reinvestment in our water supply infrastructure by ABCWA. And it also included the fact that because I'm a low water consumer, I now get a reduction in my monthly bill. So I was pleased to see that. But anyhow, overall, it seems like they have increased the monthly charge to the customers of ABCWA for water to be reinvested in the system.
Yeah, that's correct, Ralph. I mean, we kept rates steady last year, and then I'm sorry, we had 2 years of no rate increase, and then 1 year of a rate increase last year. And thanks to many leaders in the community, but I want to give credit to Councillor Feeblecorn, who wasn't on the ABCWA at the time we passed the increase, but the year before, she really started the work to say, we need to make sure that we sort of have a progressive, and I mean that in sort of a regulatory sense, a progressive water rate structure that really incentivizes that lower use and, for lack of a better word, penalizes larger use. And so I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. And the utility doesn't make money, right? We don't have profit. We don't have shareholders or dividends that we pay out. So every dollar invested in the organization goes back into it. And so whether that's an investment in salaries for, technicians and plumbers and stuff like that go out and fix leaks, or that's investments in automated meter infrastructure to, for example, now I'm sure this group of all the groups knows that you can sign up and you can get like immediate alerts if you have a leak because of AMI, right? AMI can tell what is your sort of average usage. And if it suddenly sees you spike, it'll send you an email or a mail letter that says, hey, something's weird here with your use. You should take a look. So we do invest every dollar back into the system in some way or another. And we have, and I believe need to continue to protect the no net expense policy, which says that ratepayer dollars are only going to be used to enhance services for ratepayers. We are not going to expand the system at the expense of existing ratepayers, meaning, building new reservoirs or new serving new communities at the expense of existing customers. We don't do that.
So much, Eric. And I just want to apologize. I accidentally muted you when I was trying to get rid of background noise. My sincere apologies for accidentally hitting the wrong button there. We've had a lot of great conversation in the chat. I really recommend that people speak up and have a discussion verbally. Anyone else who'd like to comment, please do so.
I'll just, and I know, Brittany, you're going to cover this later, but I'll just bring in right away is that there's a lot of links that were provided in the chat. And the water advocates, we save all this information for later viewing if people want to, click on those links at a later time.
Brittany, I guess I would like to just address one comment here from Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's in the chat, and Andrew mentions here the ABCWA could help on multiple fronts, and so absolutely right. He mentions training, modeling, helping rural small drinking water and wastewater systems, and it's kind of a secret, but they are incredibly generous at the utility with their resources. So I'll give an example. I had a community in the East Mountains, the Tranquilo Pines community, Community Water Users Association. They were seeing leaks, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but an incredible amount of loss in their system to leaks. And, this was an all volunteer board, part-time kind of retired plumber that was, helping them maintain their system. And I called up the director of ABCWA, and I wasn't asking him for help. I was asking him, what should I do here? Who can I call? Who at the state or, the feds or, who can come in here and help? Because these guys, they were like filling their reservoirs practically daily, trucking in water because their pumps couldn't keep up. I mean, just an absolute disaster. And the ABCWA's, Director Sanchez said, I'll get some crews out there. We'll go out there. We'll offer them some technical assistance. And ABCWA crews were going out there weekly to offer them leak detection assistance, finding leaks, repairing leaks, and continuing and training them to use the leak detection equipment. And now they would like help purchasing leak detection equipment from the county so that they can do this themselves. So that's just one example of the expertise and the know-how that the utility has that so many don't. And so absolutely right. And I think that's only going to become more and more necessary because we're just seeing these crises grow, and the utility is going to continue to have to help, and they do.
Eric, let me jump in. This is Andrew Haltinger. I think I echo everything you just said, and I think arcing to you and Frank's earlier comments that maybe we really have the table set now better than we ever have to see a pivot point in how we're collectively managing our water resources and all the many things that it touches upon. I really like New Mexico regionalization work of trying to get multiple entities to work collaboratively together as formally as merging the systems or just doing contractual agreements that help multiple water systems. The utility's been great in that arena, so I want to sing the praises. But right now we're trying to fix the system. We have a training system for the water operators that is broken or at least not very effective. So just knocking on everybody's door to say, hey, now we're in the midst of trying to use special appropriations from the legislature in this last cycle to do some really serious fixing and have an infrastructure built that is more statewide in its coverage. So we're consistently giving people, a career path in all four corners of the state to become a level 1, 2, 3, 4 water operator, have a career path in your home county, so support these volunteer boards that are just struggling on all accounts. I mean, it's just the volunteer board system is a model that doesn't work anymore. Just to be frank, right? It's really, really hard in many instances to fill the seats and whatnot. So I just say, hey, there's a great opportunity for engagement of the folks who are doing the best work in the state, which is the utility and a couple other instances, Lower Rio Grande Public Water Works Authority is another great leader that's helping in this front. So I just wanted to jump on and thank you all for the great work that you have done in coordination of helping others, but also just saying, hey, Maybe with the water plan, maybe with the leap ahead report, from 2022, maybe with the water task force, really deep dive blue ribbon panel assessment of where our needs are. Now's the time with the governor in the last year and a half that we have that to really make some significant progress.
Really, yeah.
So I'll sign off there, but just want to share those thoughts.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew. And I just posted a link to the Leap Ahead report. That's something that comes up frequently in our discussion. So if you want a link to that, I just dropped it in the chat. I noticed that Karen and Renee both turned off their mute button, so I believe they may have some comments to make. Please go ahead. Renee, you got your hand up. Please go first.
Yes, I have a question. Let's see, I deal with a lot of zoning issues for my community, and you mentioned earlier the Campbell Ranch on the East Mountains got approved, I think, by Edgewood, and there was a lot of opposition to it because of water concerns. And I was kind of curious, why did the decision makers approve that if some of the wells are drying out? So that's one question. The other question is, I know the city is changing, trying to upzone the zoning to encourage more development and growth. And I kind of wonder why, when they already did that a few years ago, and we need to be more sustainable in how we grow because of our water supply. And I just came from a meeting this evening before I got here. Somebody mentioned data centers use a lot of water, and there seems to be some they're starting to see data centers starting to apply to come out here and build. And I'm wondering, why would we encourage that when we have a limited water supply? And so I was wondering if you could, share your thoughts on that. Like, shouldn't we, not increase our zoning? We should be a little more restrictive, and shouldn't we focus on sustainable type industry and not try to encourage it to come out here with our limited water supply? That's my question.
Commissioner Baca, do you have any thoughts? I can take the Campbell Ranch part definitely, but on the last part.
I think you're muted.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's a really good point about, the businesses that we're recruiting. And I think should be part of the analysis. And Eric is more experienced than I do in terms of the commission reviewing, IRBs and other tools, as they call them, that we use to incentivize businesses to come into. But I think that should be, part of the checklist, to be thinking about that and to having a open and frank discussion with those prospective companies about that issue. I've seen that in a different context regarding air quality, where somebody went kind of informed of the process, quite frankly, just backed down and moved on. So yeah, I think that should be part of our checklist as where we do have, of course, there's a lot of organizations that come through without the county's direct involvement, they go through the city. But yeah, absolutely. I certainly appreciate that comment, and certainly going to be something I'm going to be thinking about going forward.
Thank you.
So yeah, a few parts of that I wanted to address in your question there, Ms. Horvath. So I'll take the last part first, talking about density and those kinds of things. And, I think there was a couple parts to that. You mentioned data centers and sort of what kinds of businesses we're trying to incent. And I totally agree with Commissioner Baca that we've got to make sure our economic development process is coupled with our sustainability goals and our water resource planning. And often, not often, but I could actually say they really are not currently. And that's part of our goal with what we're doing with our economic development community dialogues, getting that feedback. What does the community want the economic development program to actually recruit? What do we want us to be focused on? And under what guardrails, right? What businesses do we want to see more of, less of? Or what kinds of goals do we want to achieve with our recruitment efforts, right? Because we're spending these limited dollars to attract companies, and if they're sucking up all the water, maybe that's something that we want to not put as much incentives into. And so I think we are trying to have that kind of thoughtful conversation, and so that perspective needs to be part of that as we think about that. On the density piece, I think that's another thing that I know the city is working on, right? There's a lot of conversation about, centers and corridors and transit corridors, and, allowing sort of more dense zoning and, high-rise residential apartments and those kinds of things. My understanding is that a lot of times that higher density actually leads to a lower gallons per capita per day, right, than single family housing, because when we build tracts of single family housing, each one of those has a landscape to water, each one of those has leaks that can occur, all of those kinds of problems, whereas in a high-rise apartment building, you may have the same level of landscape usage, frankly, as one house, but you might have 100 people that live there. And so that's, to me, that's something we have to consider, and there's trade-offs, as always, to those different forms of development. But I think that continuing to build more and more single family housing is going to be a challenge for us. And that takes me to the last part of the question, which is, regardless of what our priorities are, we have to couple land use planning with water availability and water resource planning. And we do not do that. We say we do, and it's not true. In the time I've been on the commission, what I've come to understand is when we do a land use decision, we always say, yes, we consider water resources at a later stage, right? We approve the zoning change, or we approve the special use permit or something like that. And then when you go for your next permit, or you down the line, then we require a water availability statement. Then we require your water conservation plan to be in your permit. And so that's just critical. We have to couple those things together. And it's particularly important in the East Mountains, where water is far more of a crisis than it is in the Middle Rio Grande. And out there, for example, we continue to allow subdivisions. And every time we subdivide a parcel, the county, even though we don't have the authority to do this, the county is effectively granting a new water right, right? Because if you have 20 acres and you cut it into 10 and 10, you just gave that other 10-acre parcel a new water right for domestic use, right? They are now allotted to develop that parcel and have a domestic use. And that's a real problem, because that does not reflect the reality in that region, where the state engineer has closed the basin, right? The state engineer has said there is no more water here, no new water. But the asterisk is that only really applies to industrial, commercial use, and they have left the regulation of domestic use to the locals, to us. And so we've got to fix that. And with regards to Campbell Ranch, it's just a perfect example of literally the answer of the Planning and Zoning Commission in Edgewood was that will be handled at a later stage. So we will grant a development right, and then after the fact, we will determine the water question.
Thank you. Karen, I believe you were the next one.
Yes, this is my first meeting, so I may not have some of the basic background information other attendees do. I'm interested in what fraction of the total water available is pre-committed. I understand there's pacts with different organizations. So what fraction is available to the residents of Albuquerque, and is that allocated between residential and commercial use?
So Brittany, feel free to jump in if or you or if anyone has that. I know roughly what that number is. I believe that of kind of the total regional water budget, it's about between 5 and 10% of sort of the total amount of water in the region goes to municipal use, and that could include, everything from Intel and Facebook to, all of us.
Yeah, and I will just jump in and add, I think what's really important to remember is that all water in New Mexico is already over allocated. So there's a difference between the volume of wet water that we have available in comparison to the number of paper permits that are out and available, have been given to people for their water rights. And so we are constantly trying to bring what's available and what the actual supply is into some sort of semblance and reduce those paper permits to match supply. And then again, that leap ahead analysis document that I posted in the chat goes into some really interesting data on reductions that we're expected to see. So by 2050, we will lose another 25% of our wet water supply. So we've already over allocated our water and we're going to lose another 25%. And so it's going to be this really complicated and difficult management to bring the allocation in line with wet water supply. I know that kind of veered off track a little bit from your question, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background from like the overarching view for the state.
No, I appreciate that. I didn't have the big picture of who has the rights to exactly how much.
And one of the issues that we're going to be dealing with in the adjudication for the Middle Rio Grande is we don't really have good data on who has been allocated what by the paper. It's been done in such a incremental way over time with no really good database calculating all of those little pieces that have happened over time that we really don't know what people have. And so the adjudication is really going to set in stone, this is what you thought you had, this is what the supply is, this is what you're going to get going forward.
Thank you, Brittany.
Of course. Frank, I'm sorry, Ralph, I believe you had another question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Yes, my question was going to be specifically again about the Water Plan 2120. But what Brittany just said, as I already dropped in the comment, was that that's a super important takeaway from tonight. Is, it's hydrologic reality is that more water is allocated on paper than is actually available from our water supplies, be it surface and groundwater, and conservation. I'm going to add in conservation. So it would be, I'm just going to, once again, I'm going to put it on you, Eric and Frank, is that in the wherewithal that you might have in talking to your folks at Bernalillo County Management and among you commissioners, and then on the Water Utility Authority board, is, boy, we sure do need a coordinated effort to try to tackle this unknown database of paper water versus wet water. And, it doesn't have to be accomplished overnight, but something, maybe give it a horizon of 5 to 10 years. We have to get a handle on this. So that leads to my next question and request, if it's not in the purview right now, is on Water Plan 2120. Have they mandated to themselves that they need to do 5 and 10-year updates to that plan as they learn more about our water supply and water supply constraints?
Commissioner Baca, any thoughts, or I can answer that last part.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Okay. So yeah, Ralph, the Water 2120 is actually in the process of being updated. And so, it's a 100-year plan, but it does have regular intervals. I'm not sure what those intervals are. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 10 years, but they are in the process of updating it. And so I think as a community, we'll have a great opportunity to weigh in, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing that through my role on the utility board. But you're absolutely right that we've got to get our handle on the difference between paper and wet, and I think we all know that there is far more paper out there than there is water, and the problem I was describing in the East Mountains is just another example of that we continue to allocate new water rights. Right, the county literally is creating new water rights that we don't actually recognize that. I think a lot of my county staff would probably object to me saying that no, we don't create water rights. We just do the subdivision. But inherently, by doing that, right, we are guaranteeing something to an individual. So that's just one example of where I think we can make an impact at the county, because we can control that process. We can modify that process. But we're going to need a lot of public input on, as Elaine was saying here in the comment, that we need to hear from you all about Water 2120, which I think is now going to be Water 2130, because they're doing that update.
Thanks, Eric. What's the best way for people to provide that comment?
I want to get back to you on that with the correct answer.
Absolutely.
Of course, anybody's always welcome to send that to Commissioner Baca just put his email in there, district2@burnco.gov, and mine is district5@burnco.gov. So certainly we can make that. We can get that there, but let me get back to you, Brittany, with the exact method.
Fabulous. And we will send that out with the recording from tonight's presentation. Eric Olivas, Frank Baca, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. We really appreciate all of the information and the discussion. I feel like this was a really special presentation tonight to be able to have this back and forth conversation with you all. And I'm really excited to have more conversations like this. I think you mentioned that, you all are interested in having these conversations with your communities. It's something we can bring our presentations to and facilitate some of those discussions. So I really look forward to working on that with both of you. And again, we can't thank you enough for dedicating your time for us tonight. It really means a lot to us. I just want to close with a few slides. Next month, we will be having a presentation on how to protect New Mexico's watersheds. As Eric stated earlier tonight, the environment doesn't get talked about a lot in a lot of our conversations for the water advocates. Oftentimes, we're really focused on the human stakeholders, but this conversation will have a lot more information about the environment. So we really hope that you can join us. I am going to post the registration link in the chat. If you are registered to get our newsletter, you will get they will be in our normal newsletter, this flyer and the registration. And we'll also send out a reminder a little bit closer to the workshop itself. So please take a moment to register so that you don't forget. And I also wanted to remind you that you can always register. And if you're not able to attend, if you register, we will send you the recording of the presentation. We usually send it out the Tuesday or Wednesday following the Thursday night presentation. So you will get a copy of tonight's recording on Tuesday or Wednesday. So check your inbox for that if there's any pieces that you want to go back and watch for more information. So I said the watershed restoration is going to be our August focus. In September, we're going to be focusing on the Interstate Stream Commission's Water Planning Security Act draft rules and regulations. The rules are getting formed in such a way that they will be some public comment and they will be a hearing on those rules. So that presentation will focus on what the rules look like, what we think they need to look like, and how we're going to try to intervene to get some of those really critical components added into the rule set. So please don't miss either of those presentations. Thank you so much to our co-sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. We appreciate you getting the word out about our workshops and our speaker series. Thank you, New Mexico Water Dialogue. Thank you, Amigos Bravos. Thank you, 350 New Mexico. Thank you, Interfaith Power and Light. And thank you to the League of Women Voters of New Mexico. Thank you for co-sponsoring our events. And thank you to all of you who spent your evening with us. It was a pleasure to have you. The discussion was fabulous. We really enjoyed your contributions tonight. If you enjoyed this presentation, we are an all volunteer organization. And so any donation or volunteer time that you can provide is greatly appreciated, and it helps us provide additional resources. As we discussed, we have these fabulous new speakers bureaus presentation. So if you have a community that you think needs to know more about water rights and the water situation in New Mexico, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to give those presentations to your community. As Ralph said, we have several different of those presentations. So if any of those sounded like something that you'd like to share with your community, please let us know and we will schedule a time to give those presentations. I hope that you had a fabulous rest of your evening. And I see that we have one last hand raised from Ella Joan.
Brittany, can you send us a copy of the chat?
Yes, I will be sure to save a copy of the chat, and I will post it along with the recording tonight. So when you get
Wonderful.
the email with the recording, when you go to our website, there will be the recording, and then there'll be a copy of the chat as well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
The same to you.